I laugh, you say the dungeon. The bottom floor of SHOT Show is where you find all those single booths with one semi-crazy guy who came up with something, or you find the stuff that is just so awful and off the wall that it'll only show up at that one show, and typically that guy is generally crazy. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Podcast US, brought to you by Guns Magazine. I'm your host, Brent Wheat, joined by Roy Huntington, our official co-host, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here on one of the world's biggest gun talk programs. And you know what, Roy? We've got the numbers to prove that. So we'll talk
what
about
numbers
that.
would those be?
Gazillions. But we're going to get to that in just a second. We're going to talk about SHOT Show. I just got back from there. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Tango Down.
Tango Down has been a trusted leader in firearms parts and accessories for more than 2 decades. Whether you're upgrading your everyday carry or finishing out your next rifle build, Tango Down has you covered. Their product line continues to grow with new releases coming in 2026. Visit tangodown.com to explore the full lineup and sign up for email updates so you don't miss what's next. Tango Down, combat gear without peer.
Well, Roy, I made it back before the weather. It was -8 here today, which I know our friends up in northern Minnesota are like, that's nothing. But for here, that's pretty gosh darn cold. But we got about 12 inches of snow on the ground, and I had to change my flight to get home, but I made it. And I was here in time to do the Guns Podcast US. So how are you doing? You stayed home? How you faring here in the cold and the snow?
Still smug about not going to the SHOT Show.
I know you are. Well, okay, let's dive into our topics today. I've actually got notes. It's crazy when we prepare for an episode, but
yikes. Yeah.
Before we get started, though, we're going to talk about these numbers. You ready to toot our own horn? We hit 1 million audio downloads officially measured by something called IAB. We hit 1 million downloads on this little old podcast, Roy. That's hard to imagine. I know it's not Joe Rogan numbers, but in the gun space, that puts us up there. So
we pretty much are beating everybody in the gun space, you know?
Exactly.
I mean, there might be one, you know.
Gun Talk, our friends, the Grishams over at Gun Talk, but they've had terrestrial radio for 20 some years. So they kind of had a head start on us.
And they deserve their success. You know, I mean, He's a nice guy, and man, he's been in the front lines for 35 years.
Yep.
You know, so.
Well, I hang more with Ryan, his son, and one of these days, Ryan, if you watch this, and I think you might, we're going to get a band together for SHOT Show. So,
so 1 million. That's like
1 million.
That's like more than like 100.
Yeah. And that's certified numbers. That's not smoke and mirrors. And I got to say, if you're watching on YouTube, we've got a couple million. We hit those numbers a while back. But on the audio side, that's an accomplishment. So we like to toot that horn, and it's not because we're great. It's because of our audience. And it's mind-blowing to Roy and I when we're not recording. We talk about it. It's like, can you imagine a million people standing in line to talk to us? And just, I can't believe that. So thank you to our audience. Thanks for sticking with us. And we have extremely loyal fans. So that's pretty cool.
And we'll keep it up. I mean, people say, oh, what's your secret? And it's like, well, there's no secret.
No.
We just are truthful, and we talk about the things we know, and we admit it when we don't know it, you know, and we assure people that if they do these things or think this way, there's nothing wrong with that. Exactly. You know, and I mean, that's what I hear in the comments all the time. It's basically, hey, you guys, thanks for being regular guys.
Yep. And speaking of regular guys, a shout out to Greg over at Hickok 45. One of the first people I ran into on Tuesday morning of the show in the press room was Greg from Hickok 45. And I had to walk over. He recognized me, so he does follow the show. But I said, well, I appreciate that, but I'm sending a howdy do from Roy Huntington. That was one of the things Roy told me. If you run into Hickok, say hi. And I did. So he said hi back, Roy. So appreciate that.
I appreciate that. He drops in and comments on the YouTube channel, semi-regularly, actually. And nothing big. He doesn't, toot his own horn. He just says, well, I really agree with what you're saying there. This has been my experience too.
Yep.
Good job. And then there you go. And it is funny, though. When the first time I saw that, I went, that's Hickok 45.
Good guy. I talked to him, and it's fun that he does watch us, and I watch his channel, because I consider us, and I've said this to folks in the industry, we're kind of cut from the same cloth. He does his own thing, but in terms of being lethal fuds and old farts, that we kind of are in that wheelhouse. So when you get done watching us, go over and check out Hickok 45 if you haven't before. I think you'll like it. So
I agree.
There you go. Well, let's talk about the SHOT Show, and we've got breaking news. There was a stabbing at the SHOT Show. Well, I'm here. I hate to let the facts get in the way of a good story, but it didn't happen at SHOT Show. So I'm going to talk about that. As we're getting ready to record this, I had several people point out that this story had just broke, that there was a stabbing at the SHOT Show. And I will say the national media has not picked up on this. I think they probably will, because that's a great story. People, these dangerous gun people, they're stabbing each other. Well, your man on the scene has done some research, and I'm going to tell you what happened, Roy. Apparently, a couple of knuckleheads, which are alleged to be brothers, according to alleged eyewitnesses, and I say alleged, not that I don't believe them, but I wasn't there, and I've not talked to these people personally, but they've posted on some gun forums, and you know how we feel about gun forums, but a couple of witnesses that were there, and I've seen pictures now. Apparently, these two guys might be brothers at 6:30 p.m. outside the Starbucks on the entrance to the SHOT Show. And if you've been there, you know what we're talking about. They got into a fight, and one of them stabbed the other one pretty good in the upper arm, and he was bleeding like a stuck pig, if you've seen the pictures. So don't know if there was criminal charges, law enforcement and security got involved, but the one thing I will say is, by all accounts, folks from the SHOT Show jumped in with a tourniquet and probably saved the guy's life, because you can bleed out real quick on the upper arm. So there's no, for my opinion, the only opinion I'm going to offer is, I don't know that these guys were associated with the SHOT Show. 6:30 at night, the show is already closed. They're actually physically outside of the show area, even though it's like right at the entrance. And you're only 50 feet from the casino and the restaurants. When it all comes out in the wash, I'm willing to bet 51% that these guys weren't associated with the SHOT Show. They were probably just a couple of knuckleheads gambling at the casino and got in a fight. So that's what I know, Roy.
Well, I mean, in all the 35 years I've been going to the SHOT Show, I have never seen an incident. Never.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of people helping other people. I've seen heart attacks with, people surrounding people, helping them. I mean, all of that, people helping each other, competitors helping each other break their booths down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been pretty remarkable. There's one thing that people don't really realize is that since the Gulf War, there's a really high percentage of former military who attend the SHOT Show. A lot, they're in the industry, they teach, they work for companies, they sell the goods, they own stores, but you've seen it, I know. It's thousands of backpacks that they carry.
Yep.
And I promise you, in every single one of those backpacks, there's some kind of a medical kit.
Yep.
Because they lived it, they know the value of that. And so, yeah, if you cut your finger at the SHOT Show, you're going to have 37 people standing there with tourniquets and bandages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We call that being gang medicked.
It's right. Yeah. And so anybody, I am not making fun of that. I think
No, not at all.
I think it's excellent. And I admire these people for having the wherewithal to do that. And from what you say, sounds like maybe one of those guys got involved and maybe saved this guy's life. So.
Yep. So take it with a giant grain of salt. More will come out since this is a breaking story. But like Roy said, that's the first time I've actually heard of interpersonal violence near the SHOT Show. So, but anyway, SHOT Show itself, Roy, the big reveal is the show was definitely down. I know our friends at the National Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF, don't want to hear this, but it was a down show. The industry's down. There's no question about it. Folks in the booth, there was fewer of those. One of my friends in the industry said, yeah, our research and development budget went to salaries and keeping people. And even though a lot of people, longtime icons in the industry, have been let go, the whole thing was down. I would say attendance was down a skosh, both in the what I'd call the normal attendees, the buyers, the folks part of the industry, and then the media side, because we have our own little place up in the second floor or third floor where the media all gather, and it was down too. But I would say it was delightful. There was enough folks that you saw everybody you needed to see, but it wasn't that I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't get anywhere like it was a few years ago. So everybody gave the show pretty high marks. It was nice. Everybody that I talked to had a good show, a lot of orders, a lot of things going on. But for the media contingent, trying to be breathless, talking about all the new stuff, there really wasn't that much. And I actually had one guy say this was the boringest SHOT Show that he ever remembers. It was nothing but AR-15s. And he's pretty accurate on that. So, what are you hearing, Roy? I know you've got your finger on the pulse of the industry and you weren't there, but
yeah,
I know
I've had a lot of people.
Hear a lot.
Yeah, a lot of people call me up or send me emails and stuff, and they all said exactly the same thing. And it didn't surprise me because it was starting to get like this over the last few years. Was one guy who is like kind of world famous who attends the SHOT Show in the media. He said, upstairs, all I saw was AR-15s and suppressors. Mm-hmm. And, and he admitted, he said, yeah, okay, I'm generalizing, Smith and Wesson were there, all the people with guns and stuff like that. He said, but everybody has suppressors. Everybody had AR-15s and accessories. And he finally admitted, he said, you know what? I went downstairs in the dungeon, where all the little 8-foot tables are. And he said, there I actually was able to find some interesting new things. He said that I'm going to be able to share with his, readership and watchers. And I just thought the SHOT Show is driven by the market. So if the market is out there for AR-15s and suppressors, then that's what we're going to see. But it is a shame though, because it almost like I see the dilution, is that the right word? A diluting of the sort of small entrepreneur, innovator. Yeah. It's getting increasingly harder to get into the industry. But having said that, and I heard this from a few people too, and it was certainly that way for me, and I know it is for you. 50% of the reason we go to the SHOT Show is basically to see people we know and network and reaffirm relationships and all that kind of stuff. I have a feeling if you cut the SHOT Show exhibitors in half, from 2,500 we went to 2,000 or 1,500, I think you would still get the same number of people attending.
Yeah.
Yep. Because everybody wants to go and talk to everybody.
Exactly. Honestly, that's the way I do it. No, I feel like I got a lot done, saw everybody I needed to, but the point I was getting ready to go to was the second point on my notes here, suppressors. This was definitely the year of the suppressor with the changes in regulations. And I'll tell you the observation I'm making, Roy, and I'd heard this from a friend in the suppressor side of the industry, that it's a race to the bottom now. with the doing away of the tax fee and some of that. And there's even talk, that it may become a non-regulated item. I don't see that happening, but it's easier and less expensive to own a suppressor now than any time since probably the late 1930s. But everybody's making them. There is a lot of innovation on that side, but there's a race to the bottom. And it's going to be interesting to see because the suppressors are not inexpensive, but after this show, you're seeing some suppressors even around $200 a piece. So with no tax stamp on it, it's getting less and less costly to be a suppressor owner. For the industry and especially the longtime players, our friends at Silencer Central, Silencer Co., some of those folks, it's gonna. I'm sure they're wringing their hands over what this means for them, making premium, high quality suppressors. But yet some of the less expensive, or I even call them budget suppressors, they're flying out the door. So I think suppressors are a great thing. For a number of reasons I won't even get into, but I think we both agree suppressors are a good thing. But where do you think the industry is pointing now that suddenly everybody's making them and they're getting less expensive?
When we did this first cycle some years ago where they thought they were going to deregulate suppressors, remember that? What was it, 8 years ago or something like that?
Yeah.
That SHOT Show, I went around to people I knew in the industry. And there was one company whose the name escapes me, but they were specialists in sort of polymer casting and polymer injection molding and stuff like that. And I met with them, and they actually did a lot of OEM work for a lot of manufacturers, and they made frames, firearm frames, and stuff like that. And I said, would it be possible to do a polymer 22 suppressor? And it's always funny because you mean called two engineers over and everybody thought about it for a minute. And they said, yeah, it would be actually. They said it may not last 2,000 rounds, but, it would last. And I said, well, because then you need to go back and you need to make a $49.95 suppressor and put two of them on a blister pack, because pretty soon they're going to be for sale at Sam's Club, and Walmart, and every gun store is going to have this kiosk, and it's going to have these blister pack suppressors. And then it was right after that, though, it's something. The Las Vegas shooting happened, so all that died immediately. But I warn people of that it is going to happen. And it's always like this. Look what happened with ARs. When ARs started to go crazy, there were $2,000 and $3,000 and $4,000 AR-15 rifles, right? And then we started to see those $800 ones, and then we started to see the $500 ones, and then we started to see the Palmetto Armory, AR kits for $194, and stuff like that. Well, as you said, the suppressors are doing the same thing. I think there will always be people who want to spend $800 and get a really high quality suppressor, because there is a difference,
Sure.
But the reason why there's $250 22 pistols and $3,000 22 pistols is because there are people who can afford the $200 22 pistol. And so what this has done is that's opened up the suppressor market to those people who would not normally be customers, So, but you're right, though. It's almost like they're rapidly turning into be yet another commodity, I mean, it's like a Ruger 1022,
Yeah.
So,
well, I wonder too about, let's say the political winds of fortune swing completely the other way, which they tend to do, and suddenly suppressors are number one on the public hit list, and you start seeing, especially like you said, if there's a shooting that involves one, suddenly, they're in the crosshairs of the federal government. What are all these folks going to do? They've tooled up, they've put their money into R&D and invested in raw material and inventory, and now suddenly there's not a market for them. So that would worry me too, because just because they're legal today and everything's happy and glorious and the unicorns are jumping over the rainbow, so to speak, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. So I know that's a pessimistic view, but anytime I see a boom like that, it's like, just be careful, because it is not enshrined in our Constitution yet, anyway, that you have a right to have these things. So, I don't know.
Well, I think there are people in the industry who were the founders of the sort of suppressor market. I mean, I remember, and you remember 10 years ago, there was a handful of suppressor manufacturers, and they had small presence at the SHOT Show. And if you went in their booth, they would have a half a dozen different models, and they were $800 or $1,000 or $1,200. You remember the old days of Surefire and those kind of places. And, they had their niche market in those days, so police agencies bought them, really motivated shooters bought them, and things like that. But when I'll use an analogy. When I was the LE sales director at Bianchi International, this would have been late 98, right? 99. The inexpensive Chinese leather gear was starting to come in from China. And so I used to visit our LE distributors, and they were all pulling their hair out because they said, my competition across the way are selling a gun belt for $12.95, and I have a Bianchi gun belt that I have to sell for $39.95. Can you do something about that? And so I went back and I spoke with the president at the time, Gary French, and he actually went to China and made arrangements, and basically we got a container full of duty gun belts that we paid $5 for. and they were a $5 quality duty gun belt. I don't know what they were, pressed, leather material or I don't know, right? And we still couldn't compete with these other people, because if we put that for sale to the distributor for $8 and he was trying to sell it for $12, well, then the people who were selling them for $12 lowered the price to $10 because they were probably paying $3, right?
Yeah.
And so after a little while, I mean, we had a couple of meetings, and I told Gary, I said, look, yes, we did it, but why are we trying to compete at that end of the market where other people do it better than us? We need to focus on what we do well, which was high quality leather gear.
Yep.
And that's what we finally did. I remember we bought, it was a company that made backpacks, Gregory. I can't remember the name of them now. And we bought that company. And so now that got us into sewn goods. And so pretty soon we had, Bianchi zippered cases and Bianchi this and Bianchi that. Well, unfortunately, all the Chinese products that came in were $3. And so to the average schmo that walks in his local gun store, he sees a Bianchi zippered case for $19.95, or he sees one that looks a lot like it for $5.95. Well, we know what they're going to buy, and so we learned that lesson there too, is you can't compete with those kind of people. And so I think a lot of these suppressor companies, if they're smart, if they make high quality suppressors, they should continue to do that. But if they try to chase the commodity end of the market, they're going to get their clock cleaned by people who already know how to do that better.
Yep. Exactly. So, and almost like you read my notes, the next point you already kind of walked into was the rise of the Chinese. And I am fairly comfortable knowing the difference between a Japanese and a Chinese company based on a lot of different things. But this year, I laugh, you say the dungeon. The bottom floor of SHOT Show is where you find all those single booths with one semi-crazy guy who came up with something. And for the writers, we all say the same thing. That's where we go first, because you'll find the new cutting edge, really innovative stuff that hasn't been bought up by Bianchi or Ruger or whatever long before that. The one semi-crazy guy with a vision, or you find the stuff that is just so awful and off the wall that it'll only show up at that one show. And typically that guy is generally crazy. But what I saw this year was almost shocking. And down in that area was the Chinese optic manufacturers. I mean, a bunch of them, row after row after row. And I talked to a buddy who works for a U.S. U.S. Optic manufacturing. He goes, yeah, that's our manufacturers and distributors. They repackage it under a different name, and now they're selling direct. And I said, oh, really? And I said, well, what about tariffs and supply? He goes, they've just realized that the tariffs are, at least for the moment, done away with from the Chinese side. So it makes sense for them to come over here and start selling this stuff. Meanwhile, they're also selling it to maybe me and my competitors under a different name. And that's interesting that there is an obvious movement on the Chinese side, not so much Japanese, because most of your better quality optics are manufactured in Japan. I don't care what name you're talking, especially the glass, it's all made in Japan. But China doesn't do bad on low to mid-tier manufacturing. And the fact that they're all over here selling stuff, used to be the joke was the only time you saw the Chinese was when they were walking around as attendees and taking pictures to steal your intellectual property so they could turn around, manufacture it, and sell it for half the price. And that was absolutely true. Well, now they seem to be invading with their own products. And I'll close out my discussion here by saying, they really need to at least hire some English speakers, because I saw one that was Happy Gun Company. And it's like, I don't know if that's going to work real well, even for the budget end of the market. But anyway, I mean, had you heard anything about this Chinese invasion? And what do you think that means for our other friends that are making optics?
We used to see that, of course, in earlier, when they first started, and it started in the optics. Then you would go into a booth and there would be 300 pieces of injection molded aluminum. And I had no idea what any of them were, but this was a company. They were a Chinese company, and they were basically soliciting manufacturing from domestic makers. So, but what I see, I can't fault their ability to meet a price point with a product of adequate quality these days. Right. I mean, I put $50 Chinese scopes on 22 rifles, and I have nothing bad to say about them. And that's another thing, is like Leupold can't compete with a $50 22 scope market, and so they're wise not to try. Just there are people like me who don't mind paying $50, getting a $50 scope and putting on a $100 22 rifle. But what I really see that differentiates us is that the Chinese that I have known there is that the Chinese businessman is very much more mercenary. In other words, they are here doing that because they know they're going to make money. Yeah. They don't have a passion for hunting. They don't have a passion for target shooting. Because that doesn't exist in China, right? They don't have a passion for the industry. They're not a member of a gun club. And in our domestic market, our manufacturers tend to be driven by people who are passionate about what they do, and they're almost in business by accident.
Exactly. Profit is kind of an ancillary thing for a lot of them, especially the founders. They just have this passion.
Well, in the downstairs dungeon area, you and I both see them. And so you walk up to a table and there's a guy who's got this injection molded something, a magazine loader or something that he developed. He's so appreciative that you're there. He's very enthusiastic when he shows you what he does, right? He may or may not have ancillary sales material. A lot of times they go like, after I got here, people told me I should have had some handout or something. Yeah. And so
even hand lettered banners sometime with a Sharpie. It's like, wow, your marketing budget is nothing.
But some of those people, I mean, we talked about Bianchi. That started with John Bianchi in his garage, who made a holster. Yeah. And it eventually sold to Safariland. So, I really want to support these small guys, but that's the difference that I see. And my $50 Chinese scope has no soul. Yeah. If I dare say that, if you know what I mean. I mean, when I pick up a Leupold or a Swarovski or it's like, whoa, this has a presence to it. Yeah. And the other things are just commodity things. Let me tell you a quick story about that, because I think the SHOT Show is very much about the Chinese market too. So we're not out of place discussing this. I had a good friend of mine who had a a small knife company. It was a name brand knife company. If I said it, you would know who it is. And he used to have his knives made in Japan. Well, it just got to where there were fewer makers, and he was beginning to get priced out, even though it was kind of a higher end knife. And so, against his better judgment, he went to China. And so, at first, he made the connections. He talked to other people in the industry. He found the people who probably did the best work, who were the most reliable to work with. And he said, and you know what, Roy? I went into their display room because they meet you, they host you, right? And there was a wall that had literally hundreds and hundreds of knives of every description, every shape and size. And he said basically it was a buffet. He said you would just go around and say, well, I want those scales and I want that blade and I want that locking mechanism. He said, but what struck me was that I saw Benchmade knives. I saw buck knives. He said that were 100% copies, absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
SOG, Leatherman tools. He said they were all there. And so he said there was no allegiance to their customers. It was just a commodity. If you came to them to have something made, if they think they could make money on it after they're done, then they will. Yeah. And so I think you have to be careful on who you get into bed with,
Agreed.
I mean, you and I have both seen companies built in this industry based on a handshake at the SHOT Show. One year you see this booth and that booth. I mean, I've done it. I've introduced people. Hey, you make this and you make this. You guys should get together because it's like a natural symbiotic kind of a, supportive project endeavor. And the next year you see both of the guys in the same booth. Selling maybe some new product line or something. But I'm not even sure if that makes any sense. And I know there are people out there who buy from the Chinese market and resell their scopes and they make money, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, But I think we just have to be careful because they're going to take over,
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And, a funny story from, I think it was the 90s or 2000s. I was in a booth talking to somebody I knew, and it's funny. There's always like 6 or 8 of them in a herd, and they've got this really elaborate cameras and recording gear. And I'd started to notice them, and I was not quite in the industry like I am today. And I wasn't sure what I thought. Well, maybe there's a burgeoning gun journalism community in China. No, they were stealing our intellectual property and making no bones about it. And I wish I could remember exactly which booth it was, but I remember it was a big booth. But I was talking to the owner, who I just happened to know, and these guys came in and started, and they just start taking photographs and video and holding it up and measuring and all this stuff, totally brazen about it. And he chased them off with some big words. And I'm like, what was all that? And he explained that's what they were doing. They were stealing his product. They were going to reverse engineer it, go over to China, and, labor is cheap, use cheaper material. And then next year you would see his product offered for sale by 17 different companies because it's all state sponsored. And, again, they're chasing that price point. They don't care about shooting, hunting, the gun industry, any of that. It's just they found a narrow niche that they could reverse engineer a product and sell it back to the folks here in the United States. So, interesting.
I agree. Well, I agree. I mean, I don't know. Throw a number out. 30%, 40% of the things that are industry are made in China.
Yeah.
Across the board. Clothing, accessories, gear, optics, I mean, I have no idea. So who are we to say anything?
Exactly.
I mean, I know that there's been a move in the industry for people to bring manufacturing back from China, and some of them actually have a success,
Mm-hmm.
So, based on all that, we kind of got on a rant there, but from what I heard from some people. They saw the sort of renaissance of revolvers continuing at the SHOT Show.
True.
Smith Wesson just introduced the 2 lightweight guns. I think they call them the Night Guard series, 44 Special 357 Magnum. Somebody did tell me though at the range day they loaded this super ultra lightweight 357 Magnum at the Smith & Wesson Dispatch on range day or booth and let them fire that. And he said, I fired 3 shots and I really didn't want to shoot it anymore. He said, but I thought I had to finish it or people would talk about me. So he finished it. But it's like, boy, that was a swing and a miss on Smith & Wesson's part. It's like load it with target wad cutters, let people enjoy it, have a good time. Gosh, that was light. It was great to shoot. It was accurate. And they just say, and if you're insane, you can shoot 357 Magnum in it too, but
well, I wasn't going to bring that story up, but I'm sure that same person you were talking to was at the range. It wasn't at range day on Monday, which is out at the Boulder Gun Club. This was a special event in an indoor range. Yeah. So you're working down the line, and then it was a 686 plus, which I love 686. And I think it was might have been a 4-inch, could have been a 6-inch, but it was full house loads and bang, bang. And I shot it pretty well. I was pleased. And then I got this other one and I thought, I'm sure they've got target loads. Oh my mercy. It's been a while since my hand stung from shooting a revolver. And it's like, he's like, what'd you think of that? And I thought of all the guns I've shot, that was one of the worst. So it was, and it was funny because being in the indoor range, you hear, bang, bang, and then you hear pong, pong. It just makes the whole building resonate. So that was something.
I think I'm seeing some innovations in other areas of the industry. I'm seeing affordable, high quality guns being brought in. TSIS, Gerson, CZ, of course, and some other ones. I see accurate 22 rifles pretty much from all the manufacturers now. I noticed that podcast we did not too long ago about semi-auto or single shot for your first 22, which, by the way, we completely forgot to talk about pump action 22s, right? Which I was reminded, and I went, duh, right? But it really brought the comments out of the woodwork, and everyone agreed with us 100% across the board. Bolt action 22 rifle, that's what you start with, and it will probably remain your favorite 22 rifle forever. Well, manufacturers are seeing that, I'm also seeing some innovative, I'll call it sewn goods, I saw something the other day. It was like a zippered binocular case that you wear on the front of your chest. But it had interesting ancillary pouches, and so it was almost like a mini survival kit. Yeah. But having hunted in rain and snow and grit and sand and stuff, I grew to appreciate having a covered binocular case like that. Yeah. And so, I was just looking at it. There's some off-body gun carry equipment that's coming out now, and a lot of these people are being manufactured domestically. So, exactly. Andy Larson at Skinner Sights, he has a line of sewn goods, and all of that is done there, by ladies who he hires. And I think it shows in the quality. So,
well, you brought up another point, and I know we're going long here, but how do you describe the SHOT Show in just, 30 minutes or whatever? But I got an invite to Andy and Sheila Larson's, they call it the Been There, Done That Real Deal Breakfast. And I am completely honored that I get included on the guest list for that. So shout out to Skinner Sights. But Andy, when he was talking about before we ate, he brought up Roy Huntington, and he said Roy was at the first gathering 10, 15 years ago, and you were the one that said, if a meteor hit this building right now, it would wipe out 3/4 of the gun writers in the industry. So
it's true. In those days,
yeah. Well, and he makes the point. We invite guys that have been there, done that, know what they're talking about, and it's kind of cool. It's beyond the media now. There's folks that are head of many big companies you would know. Governor of Montana was there hanging out. And again, I feel like the little kid that got to sit at the adults table and meet and greet with all these folks. But anyway, Andy and Sheila they're just great folks, very gracious. And I'm so proud that I get to go to that breakfast. But they like you, Roy, and he always brings you up. And I'm going to close with this. He said, and one of these days we'll get him back out to the SHOT Show. And I said, we have a write-in campaign, and I've already told you, Roy, I know this isn't a shock to you. Next year, if I can, I'm going to try to get Roy out there. I think there's enough folks now that we're doing this pod thingy that we do, and just from all your years in the industry, everybody wants to know, how's Roy doing? I'm like, Roy's fine. Do you want to know about me and mine? No, but everybody wants to know about Roy. They want to know how you're doing. And I know our audience really appreciates you and your experience. So, Roy, there's going to be a write-in campaign. You might want to block out January of next year. I'm going to get you out there, even if I have to carry you on my back. So, what say you right now, a year ahead in advance?
I'm genuinely flattered and honored that these people have this misdirected, feeling and affection for me. But the feelings are mutual. I remember when Andy called me years ago, of course, and he said, hey, at the next SHOT Show, I was thinking of having a breakfast and inviting some writers. What do you think? And I remember, because I was thinking, well, these mooches, they'll come to anything if there's free food or bullets, yeah.
The gun writer handshake.
Yeah. And I said, but it's a smart idea. And if you know some people that are, and at that time, print was still king, and so I attended to that first one, and I looked up, and it was like, it really was. You went around the room, and it was the editors of all the magazines, the writers whose names you would all recognize, a few key manufacturers, leather makers. These really were movers and shakers in the industry. And it worked,
Yeah.
and I think it's because of Andy's personality and his family, because I know other manufacturers have tried to do similar things, and if you even go, it's usually like you show up, you have to listen to the 10-minute speech about boring stuff where marketing directors talk about innovation and exciting new ideas and stuff. Then you quickly eat and get out.
Yeah.
Right. But at Andy's, it's like this big hug fest.
It is.
It's like everybody said, he doesn't say anything about business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he invites his competitors. I think the guy from Marble Sights, they make similar but he said, this is about co-opetition and fellowship and supporting the Second Amendment. So
what I heard from people in the industry who attended, and I sort of attended behind the scenes, because I worked with manufacturers, like the writers, other people in the industry, marketing directors. So I know what's going on there, but people still really enjoy the sense of family that the majority of the SHOT Show has.
Yep.
Because truly, you can go in any booth and introduce yourself, and you're made to feel welcome, except in those Chinese booths down at the thing. And I'm not casting aspersions it's not anything like that, but it's the way they do business.
Yeah.
And I've been to other trade shows, and it's not always like that. It's a little more mercenary.
Yeah.
They're almost like they hate to be disturbed by their customer that comes into booth.
Yeah.
But at the SHOT Show, it doesn't matter who, especially the smaller manufacturers and the family-owned businesses. You walk in, sandwiches get put down, phones get hung up, and they come out and do that. And so people say, why did I like this industry? Why do I like this industry? And that's probably the primary reason. And the customers, our viewers, Yeah.
That's what's fun is we see friends, but friends are part of our audience. They're clients. We're just all gun folks. And that to me is what's fun about SHOT Show. So, well, Roy, we've gone long again. I'm going to have to do some editing on this one, but there's so much to talk about because the SHOT Show it's the start and the end of the year for the shooting industry. So we'll have a lot more in the coming months. Let us know what you think about what we've talked about, or if you've got questions about SHOT Show, you can reach me and Roy at editor@gunspodcast.us. Or, of course, if you're on YouTube, you can certainly leave a comment, and Roy wades through those every darn day, and it just amazes me that you can do that. But we see and hear everything that you send us, and we may not always comment on it or respond, but we're taking a look at it. So we certainly appreciate that, and we appreciate our great sponsor, Tango Down.
Visit tangodown.com to explore the full lineup and sign up for email updates so you don't miss what's next. Tango Down, combat gear without peer.
Well, it's been another great episode of the Guns Podcast US, presented by Guns Magazine and sponsored by Tango Down. Make sure you stop by gunsmagazine.com. They are our, I guess you would call them, title sponsor. And I'm the former editor of Guns Magazine. We know that the print magazine has gone away, but gunsmagazine.com is still there with all the great stuff you love and writers. And we have new stuff coming up all the time. And there may be even more coming up in the future. So hopefully things are going great that way. So check out gunsmagazine.com, and don't forget to sign up for our newsletters. That's how you can get all this gun goodness delivered to your inbox every day. So, Roy, anything I missed before we get out of here?
I think we did it.
All right. Well, we did. Well, on behalf of Roy Huntington, official co-host, I am your host, Brent Wheat of the Guns Podcast US. And as I always say, now it's time to get out there and get shooting.